So, this is Follow the Money. My name is Darvell Powell. I'm the president of Black Young Professionals of Metro Detroit. So, I know you know about us. I know he knows about us. I don't know your name. What's your name?
My name is Latrina.
Latrina. How'd you learn about this activity?
I received the email.
You got it? You're on the mailing list then?
Yes, I have no idea how I got the mailing list.
What? Is that a bad thing?
No.
Okay. All right, because we got to fix that. We can fix that. We don't want anybody upset. We want to make sure it's good and copacetic. All right, so I'm the president of Black Young Professionals. Our mission here is to cultivate a unified group of young Black professionals in the Metro Detroit area. So we focus on personal development events such as this one today, which is Follow the Money. And then we also do community service events where we go out and we work with the community, doing whatever is necessary, working with established organizations. And then last but not least, we do social events. So we always have that. And I would love for Maurice to stand on up and introduce himself.
Here, up here, doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So, good evening, everybody. Hi. My name is Maurice Miller Jr. I have the pleasure of piloting this with Darvell and my partner Tylene. I am a wealth management advisor. I have worked in financial services now for 15 years. I am also a continuing education instructor for CPA, so that just means I like to talk a lot. But I am really excited to be here because one of the focuses of not only from a business but just a personal standpoint is that we continue to connect and make these events available, because as you'll see further on, there's a lot of ground that we have to make up and we have to do it collectively.
All right. And Tylene?
I'm Tylene Henry, and I am excited to be here today in the Snowmageddon, and clearly because you guys made the trek here through the snow, you have an interest in what we're talking about. I have a passion for people and a passion for helping people to be able to succeed. So I really love these conversations, and we're really hoping that this can be a conversation and not just us talking at you. Want to make sure that you get something out of it, more than just, what you could go and Google yourself. And are empowered to feel that you are leaving here with more information and being a more informed individual, as a result of our conversation. I've been in the insurance and investment space for about 5 years, insurance more like 15 years. And typically we engage with people by helping them to make their dreams a reality, by giving them a plan and a strategy to get there. Because we can all have goals, but we all know that if we don't have a plan, if we don't have some measure of accountability or way to benchmark ourselves, we're just kind of dreaming. So please feel free to ask any questions, whether they're specific questions or just kind of general, or somebody that has a situation, and let's try to make the most of our time together.
So with that said, I'm just going to hit a quick ground rule so we know what we're going to do today and not. First thing I want you to understand is we're not trying to bring, financial literacy. Everybody says that, financial literacy. We're young professionals. We know how to do ones and twos and add things up. We understand the basics. So we're going to talk more about optimization and reminders of some of the bigger key, let's say, building blocks of building a wealth space for yourself, your own personal economic ecosystem, as you will. Also, of course, this is the get-rich-quick scheme, so we don't have any tips that are going to get you, $10,000 tomorrow. And take notes and ask questions. As Tylene said, this is going to be more conversational. We want to make sure you get value out of it. So even if we don't find the answers here today, not only do I promise to get you a follow-up with someone in particular, because it's us today, but also we are planning, like I said, other events. And so having a knowledge firsthand of what you find valuable will help us make sure the next events make even more sense for you to come to, okay? So let's just look at what our agenda is just quickly. So we're going to be talking a little bit about the history here. I'm going to go real quick through kind of the history of Black wealth in this country so you have an understanding of where we sit when we look at the data that was reported to us in the Young Professional Financial Survey. Then we're going to talk off the top. I'm going to hand it over to Tylene and Maurice to discuss more about taxes, benefits, retirement, and then they're going to go through, what do you do with your money once you get it, when you get it home, what does that look like? And actually, it looks like I have a typo, and I apologize. Pay attention to the title, not the subtext. So in your account, we're going to go to the home of the money, and then also big money moves. We're going to talk a little bit about credit, buying, leasing, cars, and homes. So we're going to have a broad spectrum. And then there's a special area called the struggle bus, which has to do more about how we can help ourselves or optimize our usage of our money when things get tight. And then we're going to go to more of an open dialogue. But during this, anytime, ask any questions that you have, and we can take the second to double click on those items. So just getting through the historic lens real quickly here. So what we see here is when we started all of this, and I'm not going to hit the clicker that too many times, we're going to talk about the first phase, which is more finding our way. And so this is right after emancipation. We're going to talk about the 13th Amendment, the 14th Amendments being passed and being added to the Constitution, the 15th Amendment, Reconstruction being a time when blacks were allowed to move socio-politically, but that, of course, was cut short by the Great Compromise. So we've seen a upward shot, but then we've seen that we kind of got cut short right there, right? Following that, we moved into more of the 1900s. So now we talk about when black-owned businesses started to make more sense. So as you see here, major legislation became, unfortunately, local ordinances and federal orders driving that drove segregation, including National Housing Act of 1934. Our population kind of dropped from 11% in terms of the national percentage of the overall population, went down to 10%, but we also seen the migration of blacks to the north. And organizations such as the NAACP and Urban League would come up during this era. That's key to understand, because when we start fighting for some of the more detailed laws and ordinances that help us keep our wealth, we need organizations, institutions, black institutions that will help us ensure that those are in place. But of course, a lot of the institutions were tied up with dealing with a lot of the, let's say, social issues that were still permeating society at that time, especially riots that were coming up, race riots, including the burning of Black Wall Street and other major black financial areas across the country that were torn down, ran through by highways, and myriad of different ploys were enacted. So then we talk about more current times, from 1950 to 2000s. We talk about the political power times, when we start to see another growth in our population percentage. This is when Brown versus the Board of Education, the Civil Rights Act, affirmative action became more materialized and in place. We also seen the crime bill and welfare reform come in during this time. And so that also meant that the Black Panthers came on the scene. We've seen a lot of mayoral races won by black individuals across the country. A lot of the major cities, or Detroit or Atlanta, all across the country, we've seen a lot of black people move into power in the cities. And then affirmative action, career opportunities help move people through corporations as well. Of course, in this phase, also we've seen race riots continue. We've seen the war on drugs, and we've seen Martin Luther King Jr. assassinated. So then we move into a more contemporary era. We talk about the Obama era. We talk about black population continuing to increase. This is a smaller time span, 2000 to 2010. But there was no major legislation like I talked about in the prior slides. This is more of a steady focus on post-racial issues that come up. So we've seen, or what we consider to be a post-racial society from some lenses, but it really wasn't, because we had police militarization. We had foreclosures that were hitting black communities particularly hard. We had a lot of impacts on the black community economically. The recession, as we know, the 07, 09 time frame, the student loan crisis, and then the bailouts that came for the bank and the auto industries. And then we move right into Black Lives Matter timing. So that's really today. And so we talk about the stability of our population percentage. Again, no notable legislation. However, there also is no notable change from our position economically, or our wealth position. So we don't see an economic rebound for people who lost their houses. Is not as great or as flexible as it had been for other races. And then, of course, with all the issues that I spoke about in the prior slide, we have the black millennials moving up to work on black power again. So the Black Lives Matter movement, realization of the growing racial wealth gap, those type of things were and still are part of the context of today. So what does that mean in reality for the current situation? That means that median household incomes for the black community are 35% less than the national average. That means that wealth growth, in terms of us growing our wealth, we're being outpaced by emerging immigrant groups. So even though we've been here, we are actually being outpaced when we look at the data in the next slide. And then we talk about the national wealth share. When we talk about wealth, which is predominantly held in anywhere from retirement accounts to homes and other institutional vehicles, we only own 2% of the national wealth while we make up 14% of the population. So that's a big discrepancy. And then last but not least, we all know personally the black tax, which is that financial support for loved ones or having to stand up taller than your non-black peers in your workspace. In order to make the same amount of money, you have to do almost 2 times the work. Those type of things are what we might call the black tax, and everyone has a different way of describing that in their personal life. So what did I mean when I said being outpaced? Now, right now, it's pretty well known that trends at the median suggest that the black household wealth will hit 0 by 2053. Some numbers are throwing that off in terms of where that number lands in terms of 2050, 2070, whatever. But as you can see on these 2 graphs here, pulled from actually the 2018 Urban League State of Black of America. Has anyone heard of that report? State of Black of America. Check that out. That's a really good report that the Urban League puts out every year. And what's interesting about it is that they look at it not only from a black lens compared to white, but they also look at it from a Hispanic lens compared to white, and then black versus Hispanic as well. And so when you start to look at that type of lens, you start to see some interesting issues. Things that are common between the groups and things that are different. So you can see us down here. You have your Latino, you have your black line, you have your white wealth line. And look at these lines. These lines are going negative as of this graph here. And then we look over here at the racial wealth divide in terms of what it means in the middle class, and you see the same type of trend, okay? So when I say that this black wealth is suggested to hit 0, we're just saying that it's going negative, and we don't see it bouncing back. We don't know what that inflection point is looking like or where it's going to come from. So today is going to be about trying to preserve or do what you can to make your own inflection point always, to always go into positive, right? And to think about what you can do for yourself and your family. And here's just another snapshot from the 2018 report from the Urban League. And they have a 2019 report that's out there as well. Basically, it shows that black women are hit the hardest by this. As you can see in these different categories in terms of the median household income, household dollars for male, for female, lowest right here at $35,300. And then also you look down here at home ownership rates, right? Even looking in with the same breakdown, you got a lot of denials going into this. So the 41% is going to be the black, 26%, 23% for males, females 28%. So it's getting kind of crazy. Or sorry, yeah, that's the denial rate. And then the ownership rate is across the top. So for us, it's 41%. For white community or white people in general, it's 71%. The index average is more around 58%. And so now we talk about what did the financial survey show. So we kind of walked through history, right? We walked through what was the past and how did we get here, and then I showed you the 2018 data from the Urban League report. So just to give you some backdrop on this here, the average and median respondent age was 31 years old. Many of them were actually around 27, so hopefully you were able to respond to the survey and get your data point recorded. And then also, as you can see this breakdown here, about 47% at least have a graduate degree, 45% had undergrad degree. We have some people who've attended college but not finished, and then there's a small sliver of those who just have a high school education that are represented by this data. So what is that data? So first of all, overwhelming majority of us, 65% of us do not own a home. Not that that's necessarily that you're supposed to, but in the sense of just giving you the context, 65% are not homeowners at this moment. Now, when we talk about what is the average salary or the estimated annual income of a black young professional, the average that was reported was about $57,000 with a median of 51. So that's kind of similar to what you hear about when you talk about the average income of America in general when we talk about a young professional, but it's going to be on the lower end of that spectrum. The other thing is that is just the median for income. Remember, income is not wealth. So remember that. And then also, how much in outstanding student loans do you have? This is pretty telling here too. An average of 47,000 and a median of 30. But what you also see here, right, is a lot of people who didn't report any. All right, you see the 0 on the far left here. There could be people who said, no, I don't want to give that away, or it could be people who don't have. So we got to double click on that, and that's a discussion item. I guess out of show of hands, I mean, I'm not asking numbers, but I have a student loan still. Does anyone else still have student loans? Okay, so we're going to figure it out. Oh, man. And then here's one other one. So how much do you currently have in savings? Average is 89, but because so many people reported none, the median was brought down to 2,000. So I think that it's a little higher due to a lot of people saying zero. I'm like, I don't know that everybody's not got savings. It's a question. I got savings, but that becomes sorry, go ahead.
Who's making this spike up?
Well, these are individuals who said they had nothing in their savings. A lot of them reported zero. You mean right here, this spike right here? Yeah, these are just people who responded and said, no, I don't have anything in my savings. And now, savings, I think, is a space where you might be a little bit more sensitive about reporting it, but this is an anonymous survey. So it may be that they see themselves as having next to nothing, that they might be check to check, and that they don't have a float to get them between checks if they missed a check, or that ubiquitous, 3 months? How much would you say someone should have in their savings?
There's a lot of different variables to that, but we would say on the low end 3 months. But it depends on household, depends on the type of business that you're in. Mm-hmm. But you want to try to be on the low end, probably 3 months.
And that's of your living expenses. So it doesn't have to be your salary, but of your living expenses.
That's a very good point. All right, so what can we do for ourselves now, just from a high level check boxes stuff? And you're going to hear a lot of this in detail and have this conversation we're going to get into with Tylene and Maurice. But, potential wealth, preserving wealth transfers from your family. When I talk about that, when I say this, and if you guys got anything to chime in with, please do. When I say this, think about homes that your parents own. Think about things that are valuable that your family owns that you could potentially receive over the next generation or next 10 years. That type of stuff, whether it be savings or insurance or whatever, that type of stuff is potential wealth transfers that could come from your family. Making sure that they still have those in good upkeep where you will actually receive them is a discussion I don't know happens often enough. Also, maximize building your own wealth. Of course, what you can do to accrue your own wealth and put money where it makes sense. Professional compensation, staying abreast and vigilant of your professional compensation, understand that you're getting paid what you're worth and not a dime less, so that you can have the maximum ability to accrue the money and wealth that you want and need. And then handling that money once you have it, how to be more precise and smart about what you do with your money. And last but not least, economic awareness. Was there anyone in this room who was at our Black Agenda event last week? Got one person. Awesome. So at Black Agenda, we talked a little bit about the agenda for the Black community, but economic awareness, staying informed and active in regards to political or legal developments that can impact you and your dollar. So if you're a homeowner in the Metro Detroit area or one of these cities, if the homeowners, if your taxes go up, property taxes, that's the type of stuff you want to be aware of and make sure that you understand that the tax is going to something you support and that it makes sense that you're paying that. Being active really makes a difference to your bottom line. So I'm going to hand it over to Maurice and Tylene to talk more about the optimization.
Awesome. Okay. So one of the things with it was economic, but it talked about the political as well. Actually, first, let me take a step back. One of the things that I always say when I'm talking to students that I feel like I should say to everybody is that your value has nothing to do with how much you have in your bank account, has nothing to do with your salary, has nothing to do with your net worth. And I think a lot of that impacts how we feel about money sometimes and why we don't talk about it as much. And so I said I was going to start saying that to everybody. Like, we came here with our value. It has nothing to do with what we're wearing, the car we drive, the education that we have. We have sat with people across all different scopes, skilled trades people, emergency room doctors, and someone's job title doesn't really always match up with what you might think their net worth might be. So I just want to start our conversation there because I want everybody to feel comfortable to ask questions and to participate in the conversation. So one of the pieces here I see talking about taxes. So it is what it is, right? You're going to have to pay taxes. As we were driving over here, we were having a conversation about the importance of having a skilled professional to do your taxes. And, I was saying that, once Walt Disney doesn't still have his cousin Leroy doing his taxes, and he said, even it doesn't matter where you are in your life, you still need to have a skilled tax professional. But what you have on the line, as you continue to increase in income, and maybe you start a business, or maybe you have rental properties, you have a lot more that you're risking by not having someone that may be, a professional and competent in that space. Do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think you covered it.
Okay, so it's really important that you're paying attention to those things, and also being aware that, getting a big income tax refund isn't necessarily a great thing, because that means that Uncle Sam got an interest-free loan on your money. So really working with a skilled professional to identify where is it that you need to be to ensure that you're not paying too much, but also most people don't want to have to owe or pay at the end of the year. Healthcare. So one of the things we talked about in the last slide was compensation. And so sometimes I'll have people call me and say, I got this job offer and they're offering me $80,000. I'm only making $60 now. I want to go to this other firm. Well, they may become a 1099 for this $80,000 jump, right? So that's changing what they're taking home. So compensation isn't just like your take-home pay. It's also the benefits that you get as well. You're considering it could be health care, it could be life insurance, it could be long-term disability. Some companies will give you options to have access to attorneys to do some basic estate planning. So make sure when you're thinking about your compensation that you're looking at things like the health care. If you become a 1099, then typically that's something that you're going to be responsible for. And so your compensation isn't going to just be, what you're taking home.
What is it? I have a question. Mm-hmm. What is a 1099?
So 1099s are people who are independent contractors. So that means that whoever you're working with, you typically have some sort of contract with, and they're paying you or your business directly. So you're responsible for taking care of your tax liabilities. So as a W-2 employee, your employer typically takes care of your responsibilities as far as pulling out your federal taxes, your state taxes, Social Security. I feel like there's another one I'm missing.
Federal, Social Security, state.
Sometimes
local,
city too, if you have local or
city or school district stuff at times too.
So as a business owner, in most cases with a 1099, then you're responsible for doing those things yourself.
You have a question?
You have a question there.
So, sorry, just coming back to your tax professional, then should we stay away from TurboTax, or is that good enough? I think most people just kind of go straight to TurboTax because it's easy and they say they're the tax professional. But what's your take on that?
I think it depends on your situation. Some people, if you have one place that you're working, one source of income, and it's pretty standard, and you're going through answering the questions. But if you're getting income from different sources, maybe you have a couple jobs, maybe you have some other things like interest that you're claiming. What would you say for TurboTax?
Well, I think a lot of times the $1 million question is, should I hire a professional? And I think one of the things, even beyond if you have the capability to do it, is take your salary, right, and divide it by 2,000 to figure out what's your hourly rate. And then calculate all the amount of time that it may take to do your taxes. And then figuring, okay, because that's one thing that we often don't think about is the time that it takes for us to do things. Would I be better off just paying a professional to do it, to know that they have my back, to know if I run into issues, I have somebody directly who knows my situation and who can talk me through things. Tylene was saying, we were talking about this on the way here. I just turned 37 a couple days ago. I hired an accountant when I was 25, and she's been with me ever since. She's seen me go from being a single man to now married with 4 children, owning multiple businesses. So she's been able to keep me abreast of everything I need to do to that point. But how much not only is your time worth to you, but then how much can a mistake cost you? I literally had somebody in my office last week who made about a $3,000 mistake on 2 years taxes 2 years ago. So I would say, you know, TurboTax, there's some people who are going to be DIYers no matter what, but I believe in having professionals there at every step. Does that help at all?
Yep.
So, back to the healthcare coverage. Yes, it's important to pick a plan that's good for you. Look at your, co-pays and co-insurance. Make sure that you ask those questions and you understand it, because sometimes a plan that might be the cheapest up front as far as what you're having come out of your paycheck, it could cost you more if you have, allergies, and let's say you're going to be visiting the doctor and there's copay. So those are things that you can be mindful of that can help you have a little bit more control over some of your cash flows. HSA accounts, it's been a while since I've been an employee, but I know that typically if you have the option to do an HSA, it's always good to put something in there, because at some point you're likely going to want to be able to use those dollars, and it's going to continue to roll over, and you're not worried about having to pay taxes on those dollars. I can speak about the flexible savings account, because I did used to have one of those. Those are great. Typically that has to do with like childcare and things like that you can be like reimbursed for a portion of what you're paying out of pocket, but it's like you have to pay for it first and then receive the dollars back. Does anybody have questions on?
I'll add to the HSA, FSA. The big thing as far as in my space, the HSA really helps because there are certain employers who offer you high deductible health plans, or HDC or HD, high deductible HDHP. So when you get that, you automatically are qualified for HSA. HSA versus FSA is a big difference. The FSA, the dollars don't roll over to the following year. The HSA, they do, and they're just there. And they're both pre-tax. But with an FSA, you got to chase and burn that money before you lose it, right? So the HSA, if you have that option, definitely put money into that. If you're getting a match for your HSA, definitely always meet the minimum of the match. And if there's any incentives that the company offers in order for you to get $3 into your HSA, always do that stuff. The basic stuff. But the HSA is a great way to get pre-tax money in there, and then you can use that for those expenses that are either deductibles or co-insurances or whatever. You usually get a debit card with your HSA. You go out, you swipe that for. You can buy cough drops with the HSA. You go look up what you're qualified to use, qualified medical expenses, and you can use that HSA for it, and that's free. That's pre-tax money. That's untaxed money. So.
And if I can add, part of understanding the HSA as well, because it's become the most popular option for most employers, and a lot of people hear high deductible and they're like, oh no, high deductible. But keep in mind too that the money that you're putting into a HSA lowers your taxes the same way your 401k contribution works. And some of the plans, and I'm not saying go do this, but some of the plans will actually allow you to invest the money in your HSA. So as you are picking your health plan, like it says on the slide, it's important to understand your needs, your health conditions, but also understanding and sitting down and doing a calculation saying, well, what's the worst thing that can happen? Mm-hmm. And if I end up in the hospital, what's the most money? So sometimes the deductible is not what you need to look at. You need to look at the maximum out of pocket.
Yep.
Because what I found on a lot of these HSA plans is that, yes, they do have a high deductible, but the max out of pocket a lot of times is actually lower. Mm-hmm. So you'll have a plan that maybe says the deductible is $2,000, meaning you have to pay everything up to $2,000, but the out of pocket max might be $4,000. So if you're somebody who, God forbid, you get in a car accident, or even better, you get pregnant, right? You are going to run that out-of-pocket max up. So it's understanding the difference between those plans and how to calculate what's best for you.
Any questions? Okay. So retirement accounts. How much needs to be in it by retirement? Does anybody have an answer to that?
I would like that answer.
Right.
Depends on where you're going. I don't know. Definitely more than $1 million.
Whatever I come back
That's
off
all your
of.
living expenses.
Just try not to live too long.
All of the things that you guys said
Don't
are
go out-
all
don't go
important
out,
factors.
fashionable, huh?
They're all important factors. Like, what's longevity like in your family? You know, what are your living expenses now? How might they change? Like, there is this common belief that once I get in retirement, I'm gonna pay less taxes and live off of less money. How many people have been working for 50 years and then they get to retirement and say, "Oh, I'm not gonna drive the same kind of car anymore. I'm gonna move into a shack." You know, you still have expenses, even if you're not planning on having an elaborate lifestyle. And quite often, your expenses just shift. So some of the things that you were spending money on, maybe you're not anymore, but there may be some additional hobbies or things like that. So when it comes down to how much needs to be in there, everybody's number is different because everyone has a different idea of where they see themselves in retirement. But one of the first ways to begin to get there is start to think about, well, what do I want to be doing in retirement? Am I going to be living where I'm living now? You know, am I going to want to travel? Do I think I'll have some philanthropic interests that I want to continue to participate or contribute to? So it's really important to have a good understanding of what your cash flow needs are. And then from that point, we can do some projections to identify how does inflation and the changing tax environment impact how much money that you may want to have on hand at the time that you retire.
And so one thing I will add to that is that I think this is one of those things where it becomes really like, no kidding, yeah, you want to get a professional to look at your plan, because when you think about it, you accrue the money, but it doesn't necessarily mean if you say, I'm going to live 20 years after I retire, that you actually have to have literally what that 20 years actually would value out to per year, right? You might have a little less, but it's not, the money still grows in the account while it's there.
Yeah, it depends. So when you think about planning for retirement, you know, like both you and Tylene said, you have to get an idea of what type of lifestyle you're going to live. So there's a couple quick calculations that you can do. One of them is if, let's say you took your expenses now, and let's assume you had no debt. What would your expenses be? And you can take that number, that annual number, and divide it by 4%. Where does the 4% come in? Well, most places will tell you, and they talk about withdrawal rates from retirement accounts. How much can you take from this pot of money without running out of money? So when I first started, this was in 2005, that number was 5%. In 15 years, that number has gone down from 4%. Some people are saying 3.5%. Why? Because people are living a lot longer. One of the other things, too, that you have to think about, and this is the problem with all financial calculators, even the sophisticated ones that Tylene and I use, is that they assume you're going to earn the same rate of return every single year. And while you are climbing that hill, think about retirement planning as mountain climbing, right? You're going up the hill. You get to the top. Now, from what I hear, because clearly I'm not a mountain climber, most accidents and deaths happen on the way down. Not on the way up, right? Because what you do to get up is different from what you do to get down. And a lot of people that we work with are not really planned and prepared for retirement because they don't think about the fact that now I have a pool of money, now I need to turn that into income. So part of the challenge, for lack of a better word, as you approach that is figuring out, okay, how am I going to turn this money into income streams? Another part of retirement planning that we talk about is taxes, right? Understanding how to control taxes in retirement. Like it says, they are what they are, and we have no control over what the government is going to do with taxation. They've changed it several times. Say what you want about our president, right? But there are certain changes that have taken place since he's been in office that some people can be taken advantage of. Those things are going to change in 2026. So as you save for retirement, one of the questions is, do I do my 401k? Of course, right? There is power in automatic and systematic saving, right? Not having to worry about it, just letting it go. And this is where having professionals to work with, because you want to figure out, okay, how much do I need to put in a 401k to, let's say, maybe lower my taxes so that I don't have this tax bill or a large one at the end of the year. But outside of that, a lot of times maxing out 401ks is not a good idea a lot of times. And here's why. You have $1. Hopefully over the next 30 years, it grows. Now you have $4 in retirement. But guess what? When you go to retire and you need to turn that into income and you start using that $4, the government is going to say, give me my cut. And what happens? You have a lot of people who get to retirement and they're like, wait a second, I did not anticipate paying this much taxes. So part of the thing as you're planning for retirement is start systematically saving in your 401k and outside, right? And what makes sense outside, that would obviously come with professional help. Let me pause. Any questions on anything of that we said?
So when you're saying outside, are you just talking about in a regular bank account?
No. Well, yes, you should be saving money, right?
Right.
But when we talk about like saving for retirement, you know, a bank account it feels nice, but from the standpoint of growing, it's kind of a dead asset.
Right.
But no, starting to systematically save in other investments outside of your 401k.
I have a question. What if my company matches?
No, still take advantage of the match, right? So it's, I wish I had a marker here. So when you are doing 401k stuff, it's playing the game of getting enough in there to try to lower your taxes and then taking advantage of the company match, right? I'm not saying don't do it, but once you figure out what that number is to get the company match or to get your taxes where they need to be, then start to go outside of it. Because if you put all your retirement savings in a 401k, you have a ticking time bomb called taxes. The other side of that is that you have very little control over what they choose, right? You have a list of options. 9 times out of 10, most people don't even understand what those options mean. And then when you get one that you like, they'll go and change it. Yes.
So I think, at least for me, or for most people, besides your 401k and your savings account, we don't really know where anyone else put their money. Is there another, like, or IRA is something that people throw around? What are the other options for put our money so it can grow?
So when you think about options in retirement planning, now y'all gonna have to forgive
He's the
me.
artiste. He's always doing the drawing.
You don't want.
We
no,
got one of these in the office.
you'll question whether an adult wrote this, but this is supposed to be a triangle.
Yeah.
So there's essentially 3 places where you can save. You have this tax later bucket, right? This is money that you're going to get a deduction on, or you're going to defer taxes, and then when you pull the money out, government is going to say, thank you, I need my cut. So those are going to be things like 401ks. Depending on your job, it may be called a thrift savings plan,
Money market.
403b, 457, whatever. Right, so this is money that's going to grow. You'll pay taxes on it later. You have the tax now bucket. This is money that you're paying taxes on now and throughout your life. These are going to be things like bank accounts, let's say a normal non-retirement mutual fund account. If you're a stock trader, and so on. So that's money you're paying taxes on now. And then you have your tax-free These are going to be things like Roth IRAs, right? So when you think about an IRA, it's no indication of what you're investing in. It's just the tax treatment of the account. You can essentially put anything in an IRA as long as whoever you hold that account with will allow you to hold it. So with Roth IRA, you don't get a tax deduction now. But as long as you leave that money in there until 59 and a half, when you pull that money out, it's tax free. So you put in 10 grand, and let's say over the years that turns into 100,000, proper age, all that 100,000 is tax free. You all with me on that one? Okay. Then you have what are called muni bonds. Whereas stock represents ownership in the company, right? You work for GM, you have GM stock, you're a shareholder. GM does well, you make money. GM struggles, you struggle. A bond is a debt instrument. So when people issue bonds, they are allowing, or you're allowing them to borrow your money. So let's say Michigan State wants to build a new facility. They'll issue a bond that says, if you let me borrow your money, we'll pay you interest. Well, the government wants you to support your local municipalities. So when you get interest from that bond, you do not have to pay taxes on it. This is normally what you're going to find in, people who would be like our parents or even grandparents' age. Very conservative investments, but still get some sort of return. And then the last area, and I'll let Tylene talk about this when she gets to insurance, is cash value life insurance. So within life insurance, there are certain policies that will allow you to accumulate money. When money is pulled from it, as long as it's done correctly, you don't have to pay taxes on it. So to answer your question, where should you go? I don't know, because I don't know everybody's individual situation. But in a perfect world, what I would say is what you want to try to strive for is to have a third of wherever you save in these different buckets. Because here's the thing. We can't control what the government does with taxes, but we can control the decisions that we make. And the goal is not to necessarily eliminate tax, is to have flexibility to control. But if you don't have somebody who's telling you this along the way, here's how most people's triangles look. Right? Everything in the 401k, some money in the bank, adopted tax-free. Nothing. Yes, sir.
So earlier this year, I was contributing to my 401k for however long I've been in my company, and I was doing the company match, so I was maxing out the 401k, and then I had 1% IRA or something like that. And I realized I didn't want to do the 1% IRA anymore. But then earlier this year, I realized that I could max out. I could get the company match by doing the IRA and not the 401k. So I switched from 401k to the IRA. I didn't realize it because I saw I only had a little bit in the IRA. Was that a good decision?
It's hard for me to say without knowing the big picture, right? Because any decision that you make, especially about retirement, you have to make it in the context of what is the end goal, right? I know everybody wants to retire, but at what point, with how much? It may be. It's hard for me to say with, that without having the full picture of things. I think what's important to know is that there are tons of options, right? And trying to make those decisions alone can be very overwhelming. And what people end up doing a lot of times is they might not make any decision, which is often the worst one.
I do have a question.
I saw it on your face.
Right.
Let's talk.
So, if you max out, I've been told that you should max out the company max for your 401k contribution before you were to start the Roth IRA. Is that because I'm thinking of the third?
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't always match with the third.
Right.
One point of clarification too is like when we say max out, there's different things. So me reading the match, so up to 4%, and this is a challenge. That's not necessarily maxing out. That's just 4%.
Right.
So is it 18.5? 18.5 is the max.
19.5.
19.5.
And I'm talking about the 19.5.
Oh, so you're saying the 19.5?
Like, I've been told that you should do the 19.5 in your 401k before I even start an IRA.
So here's the thing, and I want to tread water on this, tread lightly, because we always want to say, hey, these are not specific recommendations because we don't know your situation. The only time, and hear me, the only time we typically, when we're working with clients recommending they fully max out, is high earning executives who really need the tax deduction, but they can still save above and beyond that. But for a lot of people, I'm not a big fan of maxing out 401ks, right? It has to make sense from a tax, income, long-term goal. So I would say question mark, but maybe not.
And that's maxing out what you can contribute annually.
Right, like the 19.5.
Okay. All right. But just to be clear, that's not saying cut short if you get a matching.
No,
Right.
do that.
Next year,
Right, no, do that all
I
day.
did say
Right.
that. I did the matching.
No,
You're saying
good.
Yeah, you're saying that you now get a matching going into an IRA rather than a 401k.
Yeah.
Okay.
Look, it's free money.
Right.
Literally, you don't get that often.
2 questions. What are your names again, and what is the 19.5?
My name is Maurice.
Tylene.
Darvell.
The IRS says under current laws, if you participate in the 401k, they will allow you to put away $19,500 into the 401k, and you get a deduction on your taxes. So let's just round it out to 20. If you make $100,000 and you max that out, your taxable income before all these deductions is like $80,000. My pleasure. You had a question?
Yeah. Well, my employer started offering a Roth 401k now. Would it ever make sense to contribute to both? I'm already at least meeting the match with the regular 401k. But where would that fall in the triangle? And would it?
Good
make sense
question.
to split it?
Good question. So your Roth 401k would fall under here. So there are two sides to determining whether the Roth 401k or the Roth IRA makes the most sense. So one of the things with the Roth 401k is many times, and this is all plan specific, many times you still have limits on what the investment options are. And then let's say if something happens, many times you cannot access that money. In a Roth IRA, right, we don't want to use it as a savings account, but keep in mind the money you're putting into it, it's already been taxed. So if you put $5,000 in a Roth, and let's say a year later just something catastrophic happens, you can pull that $5,000 out without being taxed or penalized because you've already been taxed. The only thing you can't touch is the gains. So yes, there's many reasons where something like that will make sense, but again, it's saying, hey, long term, where can I potentially, right? And this potentially, because none of this stuff is guaranteed, where do I have better options and what gives me the most flexibility? So yeah, maybe. I'm sorry, financial advisors, you can't get a straight answer, right?
Definitely.
There's going to be a lot of maybes and ifs and sort of.
My friend told me that my Caucasian friend at work told me that if I have more money in my Roth IRA / Roth 401k, that if I were to leave my company and move that money into some other account, that take the money out except for the gains or something like that.
Yeah. You can separate the gains.
He was saying something like at least we need to have an account for at least 5 years or something.
Got to be vested or something?
So with Roth accounts, the way normal Roth IRAs work is that the government says this: because of the money you've put into it has already been taxed, you can always get your contributions out. For you to get the gains out of a Roth IRA, it has to be the later of 59 and a half or 5 years. So for all of us, right, the latter is going to be 59 and a half, right? But for my father, who's 64, if he puts money in the Roth, he has to wait 5 years to get that money out. It depends on the plan as to what the nuances are of the Roth 401k, and that's why you have to understand what the plan allows before you put money into it.
I don't understand. You said 59 months?
No, age 59 and a half.
Oh, age 59.
Yeah, so the government says in order for you to pull your gains out of this account, keep in mind that as you're putting money into it, as it's growing, you don't have to claim it on your taxes. But in order for you to get those gains out tax-free, you have to wait till 59 and a half age.
Okay.
You were talking about the Roth one. He was saying that like wherever account that the money, like if I were to leave my employer, wherever account that the money ends up in, that like as soon as it gets in that account, that account has to exist for 5 years, and then I can take money out if it's a Roth, as opposed to like a 401k or something like that.
The 5 year on the gains, there are certain mitigating circumstances. Like the contribution, yes, that's correct. Yes.
So he's saying basically he has to start over. Is that what he's asking?
Well, yeah, because when you open up a Roth IRA, right, that 5 years starts, right? So even as you're adding money into it, it starts then. Typically, because the 401k part is not in an IRA, that's completely different. But what you can do is if you were to separate, you can always still roll that after-tax money into a Roth IRA and still continue to defer those gains. But you just have to know what the plan, again, allows you to do both while you're employed and after separation.
One other thing that came to mind when you talk about your colleagues. So sometimes I'll ask people when we're sitting down, how did you choose your investment options? And they may say, oh, my neighbor such and such that I work with chose these. Each person is going to have a different risk tolerance. Often the people that you work with may be a different age. And so what might be appropriate for them may not be appropriate for you. And, you know, oftentimes you're not sitting down looking at their account. So like people are like, oh, such and such said they got, 25% using, they put everything into this particular fund. And so it is important that you get some professional advice, because sometimes people are lucky. Sometimes people may or may not be familiar with what they're even like sharing with you is their interpretation of it. So it is always good to speak with a professional. It sounds like the buddy that you work with probably has some, investment experience, but at the same time, the information that he has may have been told to him relevant to his situation, which may not apply to you. So that can be a challenge sometimes with choosing your investment allocations, based on what your neighbor might be doing. Not to say that you're doing that, but just that overall is something common that I come across. Let's see, anything else? So when you're leaving an employer, you do have those options of rolling it into your new employer's plan, or putting it into opening up a like account that you would hold yourself, so an individual IRA or an individual Roth IRA that you could roll those funds into, because people are often asking that. And then just kind of to parlay a little bit, I've also had people say that they've got $20,000 in savings, and I'm like, that's really great, and they're counting their 401k or retirement assets as their savings, and it is saving, but it's very important that your retirement money, you don't really want to consider that your emergency fund. Like, of course, if you needed the money, that you could get access to it, but you have a plan, right? You're trying to get to a point in time where you have the freedom to work or not work, and even if you're not working at a period of time, you're not going to get any closer to that retirement date or financial independence date if we dip into those monies in advance. So you really want to try to have something separate for your savings that you can access if you need, because the retirement money really is the long-term money. From an insurance standpoint, Work insurance is great. One of the things, even with the 401k plan and what they'll match for you, each year they typically are deciding what benefits are they going to provide to employees. And so what they may offer one year may not be what is offered the next year, and that's similar with life insurance as well. Some employers have some really great plans in place that if you have the employer's life insurance coverage, you can then port that over if you were to leave that employer and have your own, purchase it for yourself. But in most cases, you're not able to take that life insurance with you. So it is important that you really are aware of what your options are with your employer coverage, whether or not it's a term.
I think it's within like 30 days or something like that.
That you can buy it or something.
Yeah, to convert from group to.
Some employers give you that option, but yeah, it's usually somewhere between 30 to 60 days or so that you have to make a choice. And it may be a term coverage or it could be whole life. It just depends on what your employer is offering you. But it's important to review your employer benefits booklet and be aware of what you have and what your options would be if you choose to leave.
And let me, before you talk about the rest of the questions, let me explain to you what happens over that 30 days, because we actually manage a program that oversees a good part of various companies' insurance benefits. So what ends up happening is you get this packet when you leave a job, right? It's this thick. Most of the stuff in there does not make any sense. So when you leave a job, they'll say you have two options on your life insurance if you want to continue it through them. They'll say, okay, here's your coverage, and then they'll have age bands. So every age band that you check off, a lot of times it might be in 5-year increments, the price goes up. Keep in mind that the job already limits on how much life insurance you can get through them without what they call proving that you're insurable, right? The other option is to take this permanent policy. But because they have to take everybody within that 30 days, the price is a lot higher than what you would get on your own. So a lot of times people look at it and say, oh, the insurance through work is cheap. But I try to get people, and we try to get people to understand the difference between price and cost. Right? Because price is what you pay. Cost is the long-term implication of that decision. So we'll end up getting a lot of people who are in their 60s and never bought coverage outside of work, and now they're kind of stuck in this bubble of getting through their job, and it's like a mortgage payment. And I'm not exaggerating. So
that was the next piece is, either you're leaving your employer or you're retiring, right? Those are times when you're looking at your insurance quite often. And it is a challenge because if you're 65 and you're now trying, I hope that when I'm 65, I'm in even better shape than I am now. My dad is in better shape than I am. But in most cases, many of us are not going to be, every day we get older, we get closer to dying, unfortunately. And so our health is changing. And so our ability to get coverage that's affordable is not going to be as great. The cost of insurance through work, there are some employers that give you some that you don't have to pay for, maybe like a simple $10,000 burial type of coverage. But most employers, there is some type of expense associated with how much you'll pay for your coverage. And let's see, how much life insurance do I need? Again, similar to how much money do you need to have saved for retirement? It all depends on the individual. What are some things that people do think about as they're determining how much life insurance they want to have? Sometimes they're looking at their liabilities. Like maybe they want to make sure if something happens to them, their mortgage can be paid off. Maybe they have some debt that they want to have taken care of. Sometimes people who have children, they want to ensure that the remaining spouse or whoever is going to be taking care of their child has a certain amount of income that will be coming in every year to take care of their children. And so typically one of the awesome resources that we use to help families and individuals identify what might be a good amount of life insurance is a website called lifehappens.org. It's a nonprofit organization, and it has a life insurance calculator on it. And basically it takes you through a series of questions. You know, sometimes people think, okay, well, $10,000 is enough to bury me. Well, life insurance isn't really for burial. Like, that's what we talk about in our communities quite often, but it isn't just for burial. It's really for the people who are going to still be alive, right? That may be relying upon you for one reason or another. As well, sometimes people want to leave money for philanthropic interests. So, you know, we have clients that leave money to their college or university. They may leave money to their church. And so, you know, taking the time to go through the calculator and identify what you would like to have happen when you pass away, whether it's, you know, sooner or later in life, is very important. As well, what type should you own? So quite often people don't just own one or the other. They own more than one type of insurance. So they may have some term, and typically people might use term insurance, which is for a period of time, or maybe debts that they have for a period of time. So maybe I know that my mortgage is 30 years, and I want to make sure if something happens to me before I pay that mortgage off, that I've got coverage for that, and I might have a policy that has a 30-year period of time because that's, you know, when I want to make sure I have coverage for that period of time. Typically, whole life coverage, people think it's more expensive, but really you're just paying the cost of insurance throughout the period of the policy because they know it's gonna pay out. You're gonna die. We're all gonna die one day, right? Sooner or later. And so whole life policies are typically, when you look at the rates, if you have ever talked to someone and they told you, you know, I'm paying, you know, $500 a month for my policy, and you're maybe thinking I'm only paying $20 a month. You may be looking at the difference between a term policy and a whole life policy. But typically, a whole life policy is looked at as more of an asset. So it's something that would be positive on your balance sheet, and that it's increasing in value over time. And there's different types of whole life policies, just like there's different types of term policies. And what's going to be best for you, again, is going to be something that's going to be based upon your situation and what you would like to have happen. Any specific questions about life insurance?
I was going to just touch on what you said. You said something very important that I've never heard said before, is the idea of carrying term insurance during different phases of your life.
Mm-hmm.
As you are someone bearing a certain expense.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so we talked about earlier this idea of passing on wealth. Like if your parents own something or you have some heirloom in your family that's very valuable, you want it to be able to make it down to you. God forbid, whatever may happen when that relative moves on, passes away, the insurance is something that when they have it, that can help protect those type of things from being taken away from the family. Similar to your situation. So I was going to ask, would that be something that people would look at as a way to, I guess, move their children as a familial unit up in wealth position after they pass away?
Yeah,
Is that...
I thought there was a whole life insurance. You can also do that with whole life insurance where it's increasing or decreasing. So like
value?
Yeah, you don't think you have to get term to pay less now.
Well, I guess, I think that might be, but go ahead.
So absolutely, that's my plan. So I'm not a trust fund baby, but my baby is a trust fund baby. Do I have $1 million sitting in an account? No. But have I put plans in place to ensure that at my demise that there's a trust that can be funded by life insurance? Absolutely. The concept of whole life increasing, that is typical of whole life, but there are different types of whole life policies. So it's very important to understand that each company and each policy is going to be different. So you want to make sure that you're asking questions about what happens in the future, what happens to the cost of the coverage. Am I going to be paying the same premiums every year, or are they going to increase at a certain point? How long do I pay the premiums? So even with whole life, you could decide that you're going to pay it for 100 years, which is typically what they consider your whole life. Or sometimes you can do a 10 pay or 12 pay or a 65 pay, where when you turn 65, you stop paying. So you're paying the premium for 65 years or up until age 65. So there's different options there, but definitely you can use it as a tool to pass on wealth. Again, that's a part of that strategy in identifying what do you want to have happen when you pass away. What are the debts that are associated, and what do you want to just be left to be a part of your legacy?
And if I can add too, let's even remove the fact that we're even talking about life insurance and talk about more about what it does, right, versus what it is. Because I've heard a joke. You want to clear a room, tell somebody you sell life insurance, right? Because nobody wants to talk about it. Mm. But when you talk about mobilizing our community and creating generational wealth, it's one of the more powerful and best ways to do it, right? Because it's giving somebody a income tax-free lump sum when they need it the most, right? As somebody who's worked in this profession for several years, I see what happens to families and assets when people die. And they fight, or sometimes people have to sell businesses, sometimes people have to sell homes. When someone dies, everybody has their hand out, right? The funeral home, creditors, the life insurance, and who you're working with, that agent, that's the one person coming in saying, hey, I have something for your family, right? Versus trying to take something away.
He's the only
I
green
have
guy.
something for your family. Like, to me, and I'm sure Tylene will feel the same way, it's one of the more basic things that, like, all families need to establish across the board is life insurance for the family, right? All my kids have it. Just a month ago, my wife lost her friend who was 39 years old. 2 kids, no life insurance. So you know what that means, right? What's on the internet now? GoFundMe. 2 weeks later, her brother died. This same young lady, he didn't have life insurance. So now their brother bearing 2 siblings and trying to scratch money together. So you can't even grieve, right? You can't even grieve because you're scrambling. So I know it's an uncomfortable situation, and it's not always the easiest thing to talk about, but I think what we have to look at is when we make financial decisions that are tied to an end goal, we're more likely to actually carry through with that.
I want to ask why you was actually, I wrote it down to ask, do you guys set up trusts?
So we work with estate attorneys.
Okay.
So an estate attorney would be the person or persons who set it up. But yeah, we have a network of professionals we can connect you to.
So I'm going to accelerate us and get us moving because I know we're running out of time. These are really great questions, and that's what this is about, is having this discussion. But I don't want you guys to be held up too much. But was there anything else about these 4 elements that were on the screen?
I have a question. I don't know if it's okay. My question is more of since I have a financial advisor, can you talk about the cost of a financial advisor? Is it better to have one that has like an annual fee, or to have one that makes money off of the products that they sell you? Can you talk about that a little bit? Absolutely. One more really quick thing, because I didn't say this about the life insurance. It's great to have life insurance, but you have to have a plan for it later. So that's why the trust is important, so it gets to where it needs to be. Because I could leave my son $1 million and he's 18 and he's the coolest kid not going to college. So a trust is going to dictate who's going to get your property. So sorry, that's that piece. As far as a financial advisor, one of the things that he just said that was important is how much are you paying versus how much does it cost, right? And so what does it cost you not to have a financial advisor? That's one piece. And is it better to be paying monthly or annually? At the end of the day, that's like your payment terms. You really want to look at what is the cost, what are you paying for, what is your cost of receiving advice, and what are you getting for that advice? I'm not a fee-based planner, but when Maurice and I work with clients, we typically work in a fee-based agreement. And so I think one of the more important things is to identify your level of comfort with that advisor, that you do some research to identify, what is their track record of success, what type of professional qualifications do they have as far as licensure is concerned. When you sit down with an advisor, you want to find out who's doing most of the talking. If you sit down with someone and, within 10 or 15 minutes, they're trying to sell you a bunch of products and they don't know anything about you, they don't know if your parents are still living, they don't know if you have kids, they don't know what your future career ambitions are, they don't know how you feel about money, they haven't asked you anything about, what your goals are pertaining to getting married or having children, whatever the case is, then you may not be in the right space. Because one of the things that's important to understand when you're working with any type of financial professional, one, you have to know what you're looking for them to do, but two, you want to make sure that they're doing their due diligence, because we can never give anybody any type of recommendations or advice without them pretty much getting financially naked. We got to know everything in order to make sure that we're giving you accurate advice.
And I would say, I think Tylene said the most important thing is you have to know what you're looking for out of that professional and what you want them to provide to you. I primarily, and as Tylene said, we work together, I primarily work on a fee base, but there's a lot of people who may want to engage in that type of relationship, but it just does not make sense for their situation. And there are times where maybe the other approach to you're paid as they're implementing stuff is better for the client. I think what the main thing is for one, do you trust that person? Because there's a lot of publication that says go fee only, right? Only go to an advisor that charges you a fee. That does not necessarily mean that that person is going to do right by you. They should, but there's no guarantee on that. The other thing is, do they understand you and do you understand them? That's really the main thing. How they are compensated, you should know, but that's secondary. There's not a cookie cutter way to approach it. I think you have to first go in knowing what you want out of that person.
Yep, absolutely.
We talked about budget.
Mm-hmm.
Talked about emergency fund. That was like minimum of 3, right?
Yep.
Minimum 3. And let me just quickly touch on the connection between investing, right, and emergency fund. We tell people all the time, there's no investment return great enough to make up for a lack of saving money. Like that investment doesn't exist. You want something that's going to help you track your expenses, but the best thing to do is automate everything, right? Because what you don't want to end up is what we call 401k poor. These are people who retire with a large amount in their 401k and nothing in the bank. Why? Because the 401k was automatic, but the savings was not, right? So automate your savings, automate your 401k. If you do other investments, automate all that stuff so you don't have to think about it.
I even throw in there in terms of automation, with your employer, you can set up where you deposit money into a separate account, like maybe 10% or $20 or whatever. That might be something that might be better for you if you think you're prone to go into your own bank and disable the automatic transfer to your savings account that happens every time you get paid. So then now you got to do a bunch of paperwork to disable what's taken out of your check. Now you got that, layers to protect yourself from yourself. Sometimes it's good.
Get an online savings account.
Online savings account?
Online savings account is a good idea. Separate it from your checking.
Mm.
Because what happens is out of sight, out of mind.
Mm.
And if it's an online savings account, it's probably going to take 2 days to show up. So if you went out hanging out, and it's like, I need to transfer some money. It's too late.
Right.
it's too late. So do whatever you have to do to save you from you. Right?
Oh man.
I had a high yield savings account once. It was pretty, it was nice. It was like 2%.
Yeah. Find a reputable bank. That's an idea, and do online.
Good.
Be mindful of those recurring expenses too. You sign up for something free, and then all of a sudden you got $40 or $50 coming out every quarter, and maybe you didn't even realize it till you went to update your budget, and it might be $400 or $500 later that you're recognizing this $20 or $40 that's been coming out for the past couple of years.
So I guess this question was already kind of answered in a sense in terms of, what is an emergency fund? But an emergency fund isn't necessarily 3 months. It really depends on your situation, right?
Depends on your expenses.
So do you ever direct anyone to make an emergency fund and then move to something else as a focus point?
What we'll do a lot of times, and we don't have time for it, but it's this exercise called the allocation of the dollar, where we'll walk people through, no matter what your income is, if you can fall in these guidelines or close to them, you'll put yourself in a position long term. So one of the things we say is, okay, we have the emergency fund. Are there short-term goals, car, whatever? Once we figure out that, we then need to start redirecting that money somewhere where it's actually going to grow. Right? People get to retirement and they I don't want to lose money in the stock market. Who does? Like, nobody comes in our office saying, please lose my money. It happens. But all of us, the greatest risk we face when it comes to retirement is running out of money. And that's the thing that we have to focus on. Market's going to do what it's going to do.
All right. I think someone asked about this, a second ago. But these are, some percentage rates of things that you could expect if you were talking about things you're doing after you put up that account, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's a savings account, which is like, what? The stall vehicle, what's that? What I heard is what do you call it?
I don't know. What I said, dead asset?
Yeah.
I don't know. I got a lot of weird idioms that just come out at random times. So.
Then, the stock market, you got the money, right? To do so.
What's PER stand for?
PER. So, that's which is specific to the last one in terms of flipping or renting houses. That was a question that actually came in the survey. It was like, what about investing my money after I fill up my account by buying houses and flipping them? Well, if you ask yourself if you're going to do that, typically people may see about 30%. If you do it right? There's a lot of variables that go into actually buying a house, fixing it, and then turning a profit out of it. But if everything goes well for you, you can see at least 30%. But many times people see much more, right? They see 100%, 200%. But there's a lot that goes into that. And actually, we're going to do another event in April where we're going to double click on this entire idea of buying houses in Detroit, whether it be for investment or for your own family to live in or yourself, and like, where's a good neighborhood, what's a good investment, or should I be doing this or should I be doing that, and what is all involved in that type of adventure. Because a lot of people buy homes even still today, as far as young professionals, outside the city limits. A lot of people still buying homes in like not Northville, Southfield. I got a friend who's bought one in Madison Heights. So it's like, what's the best thing for you to do from a financial standpoint, and also if you're looking for something to do with a couple dollars on the side. But those are just examples of numbers, right? And then just to go back to what I was saying in regards to the $1,000 properties for sale in Detroit, or just this idea of buying houses and getting in there and trying to use that as a vehicle to be an investment for you and turn more money out very quickly. There's a lot that goes into that, and I did want to mention that that's something we're going to double click on in a couple months at another event. We're going to bring in experts who know about everything from the construction side to the neighborhoods to actually what happens if you decide I want to buy a house or rent it out. People, using that as a stream of income. There's a lot of nuance and differences and, risks and opportunities in that entire spectrum. So that's just kind of what this slide was going to speak to. That quick investment. Now, here's a good question. What happens if my partner has no retirement?
Partner isn't married?
Married.
So my wife stays at home with our children. I make contributions on her behalf to her retirement account. You can do spousal contributions.
So does that double the limit then in terms of like that?
No, she's still limited to $5,500 a year on that end, right? Because that's your IRA limit.
Okay, IRA.
Right. So I can make spousal contributions on her behalf.
Still a separate account.
Yep, still a separate account. Still a separate account. So if I'm quote unquote maxing out, which I think you already know where I fall on that, but I can put away for her. And then for business owners, if somebody's a business owner, you can get really, what's the word I'm looking for? Creative. You can get really creative with what you can do. Now it has to be legit, right? Like the spouse has to work in the business. But
nobody knows anything.
Right. Look, that's between you and the IRS.
Right.
I haven't had any issues with them, and I don't plan on.
What would be the benefit though, other than?
Let's say I own a business, right? And my wife, even if she is not necessarily full-time, but she works in that business, we can still set up our own 401k. Through us, it's called a solo 401k. It's for business owners who only it's them and their spouse. And we have the full provisions that you all have at your jobs. So there's a lot that you can do. But again, remember, saving for retirement is just not about a 401k. If you have to, just save outside of the 401k. It's okay. The important thing is that you do save.
get started, establish good habits, you know.
How do you recommend like saving in stocks or yeah?
I would say the first thing is get familiar with what are your options within your 401k. So start there. I don't know how many people actually like do any research on the mutual funds that are even available within their 401k. Sometimes we're just picking them because of, you know, it's a moderate or it's a risky stock or maybe small cap. But look up that ticker symbol. You can go to Google and pull up a Morningstar report, and you can begin to learn what are the underlying investments. And that may help you to then go down the path of looking at stocks that you might want to invest in. So maybe you pick a mutual fund that has Microsoft and Nike in it, or something like, or something, you know, a company you never have heard of, and you do some research on it, and you decide maybe you want to get more exposure. But I think research is the key, and having an idea of what you want to do, and as well, of course, talking to a professional. But if you're just saying like Robinhood, E-Trade type of thing, I would start with getting familiar with what you have in your own 401k account and use that as kind of a gateway to start to get more exposure.
That's a really good tip. I never heard that before. It really is. Like, think about dealing with your 401k first, and then you'll learn enough to go into, what is it, Robinhood?
I'm not saying you're learning enough.
Well, not
I'm just
enough. I'll
saying
take that back.
that can be a path, because a lot of people I talk to, they haven't done any research on what's in their 401k. They're just kind of picking. So if you're curious, that's a great place to start. Find out, what are you currently invested in? How has it done historically? You know.
And sometimes, to Tylene's point, sometimes your job may have access to research reports that you can't get on your own, or that you have to pay for, but because you can go in and click on that fund, you may have access to some additional research to it.
That's a good point. Yeah. All right. Just quickly, we put some hacks up here, right? Just small things that you kind of talked about to some degree. Hacks like, you know, the raise hack. I don't know anybody heard about the raise hack. You get a raise, then you take the delta, and then you direct it towards something that you need to work on rather than living off of the new raise, right? So that little thing, and then also, I don't know, is anyone here big travelers? There's a lot of people travel here. Mark, we got some travelers. So sometimes you look at, you know, what are the benefits? You know, you look at the benefits of the credit card or whatever that you use to, you know, for your daily expenses. Of course, like paying this off in full, not recommending people go out and buy, you know, get credit cards for credit card's sake. But if you're a traveler, you may be able to save some bucks if you have a credit card that accrues points. But you got to be competitive about those choices. And you got to think about where you are with your credit and your financial situation to see if it even makes sense to do, right? So that was one hack. Another one was about the phone bill, internet, that basic stuff. You know, they always want to jack the rate up on you, right? We're talking about those recurring charges that show up on the bill. You start out with the free YouTube for a month, and then all of a sudden YouTube costs $12, then YouTube costs $20. Or not that this happened to me, but just, you know, be careful with that.
That's how Google did.
Yeah, right. And then also, here's one good thing. This last one is looking for deals through work. Depending on where you work, they have these little hidden portals talking about, oh, you know, you can buy vacuums, you can buy houses, you can buy whatever discounted rates or whatever. You know, be abreast of the different, let's say, the different benefits you have, because not all the benefits they give you look like traditional benefits. It's like, oh yeah, there's that marketplace. You can get Microsoft Office for free. Oh, I didn't.
And also make sure you understand if your job offers you certain like legal provisions. I had a client who I introduced him to an estate attorney, and a plan that would have cost them nearly $2,000, his job actually reimbursed them for.
By the way, like I didn't know like about using my HSA and stuff, and I heard that you have to like send in like report of everything that you spent for. But like I ended up getting an HSA card, so that makes like everything so much easier.
Yeah.
I swiped that thing, cough syrup,
Right.
whatever, Band-Aids.
So I think one hack you can add, I don't know if you have it on the other slide, but since I live in Detroit, car insurance is out of control. So I almost, in the last 2 or 3 years, I switched both my homeowners and my car insurance, and they've all gone down just because they go up for no reason.
They do.
So that's why I just when I called, I was like, why did it go up by $100? So cost of doing business, okay. So that's one thing, because I have a house in Detroit, and mean, I switch my homeowners and my car insurance. If that's something you can always shop around, right?
Yeah,
You're
they
not
get you
tied
after a
down.
couple of years.
That's
They
a
hit you with an
huge
intro
amount
rate.
that you can save.
So, yeah, keep abreast of those little things, and that's when we talk about precision of handling money. Like, oh yeah, we got to maneuver this. They trying to get me over here at Comcast, got to bounce over here. You know, whatever makes sense for your lifestyle, and you can work out. So, as we're tight on time, I'll just kind of swim through these. What we will do is we will release this deck, so you can download it and read through the details of the different slides that are left, and so we can get to any final questions and answers for Tylene and Maurice. So, just what this was talking about is renting and leasing houses, or if you're going to buy, or if you're going to lease, or if you're going to own or buy a new house. Like I said, we got an event coming up on buying homes, but anything you guys want to add onto any of these slides about the ideas of what they should think about when buying a house, or if they should rent versus anything?
Well, one of the biggest things I see is just because you get approved for a certain amount doesn't mean that that's going to be the best for your particular budget. So I've seen people that we call it like house poor. So they can pay their car note, but like not car note, but their home note, but the other areas that they might be wanting to save towards on the long run, like retirement, may not be happening. So make sure that when you're looking at, purchasing a home, that you're really looking at, can I maintain my current quality of life with this new home purchase? And then as well, the additional expenses. So quite often, quite a few of our clients have bought new homes, and in that first couple of years of moving into a home, even if you're moving into one that's move-in ready, there's additional expenses that come along with that. So taking that into consideration, furniture, when was the roof done, things like that when you're looking at purchasing a home. And then as well, it's still a good idea when you're leasing. Some places require you to have like an umbrella policy or a liability policy. It's good to look at the different ways that you can protect yourself from liability. And then as well, if you have like, storage units and things like that, having that renter's insurance to make sure that you're protected. Trying to think of what else pertaining to home purchases.
If I could add to Tylene's point, what Tylene is saying is don't go buy the big dumb house. Because here's what happens for a lot of younger people is that, a lot of stuff is first generational, right? So to her point, you get approved, you say, bam, I can do this. And then you end up house poor. So there's a couple rule of thumbs when you think about buying a house. There's one that says no more than 2 to 3 times your salary. But the bigger thing is, can I save the same amount of money that I'm paying in a mortgage? And if the answer is emphatically no, and like nowhere near it, then maybe you need to reconsider.
Just add to that too. So I also have to kind of look at property taxes, right? I don't know if it's specific to Detroit, but where I bought my house, there's a neighborhood enterprise zone where if you get like half the tax down, 50% off for a few years after that. So that's one thing one can navigate. So at least in the city of Detroit, I can't speak about outside of Detroit, but the property tax is, I think, I don't know if they calculate that in the mortgage calculations or not. Maybe they do, I don't remember, but.
Yeah, they do. They'll calculate that in the total payment, and then obviously that's going to change over time as well. And if your property taxes are going up, that means the value of the property is going up. So that's not necessarily a bad thing, but if those property taxes get out of hand,
You pay attention to what's going on.
exactly.
Right, like we said earlier, in terms of being abreast of your environment in terms of political or ordinance or legal ramifications of the laws that are passed.
Also, the interest rate, right? That's important. I think like the interest rate is based on the U.S. mortgage rate, which is like if the lower the U.S. mortgage rate is, the lower the rate that they can give you.
Oh, you talking about for the mortgage?
Yeah. So like right now it's at last week it was 3.45, which is like the lowest it's been since late 2016. And even in 2016, it only stayed that low for like a couple of months. And then before that, it was like, half a decade or a decade. So like this is like the lowest it's been in like a decade and a half. Like, aside from late 2016.
the mortgage rates change every day. So like that's not a selling trick when you talk to somebody. That is true. Matter of fact, not only do they change every day, they change throughout the day.
If I would have known that ahead of time, like I bought my condo in November 2018. That was literally the worst possible time to buy because the mortgage rate was at like 5%. So I ended up having mine at 5.25, which was horrendous. I refinanced it down to under 4, but like that was bad. So if I would have seen that chart, I wouldn't have done that. I would have waited.
But then the property might not have been there that you wanted. You know, that's one of those things you can't control, right? You gotta figure it out.
I'm a proponent. Don't beat yourself up too much about making the decisions you have to make. You know, even if it doesn't seem like it's the most optimal from every characteristic, right?
Right.
So one thing I'll throw in here on the renting side is I learned the hard way. People underestimate this Detroit, the Metro Detroit market. If you're looking somewhere to rent or lease, whether it be in Detroit specifically or be in the suburbs, properties move quicker than even they can appear on a Zillow or a Hot Pads or anything like that. And back to that, what does it cost you to have a professional supporting you versus what's the actual amount you pay them, right? I learned the hard way. It cost me quite a bit to not have a real estate agent when I was looking for my current condo because I was trying to do it myself. I thought, I can get this, it actually costs quite a bit, time and money. So I just wanted to throw that out there because it's a lesson I learned the hard way. So even if you're renting, you can find someone who can help you get something quick because they can get to the MLS, they can look at it, they can call, they can make a lot of maneuvers and help you quickly. All right. Stuff to keep in mind for buying. We won't get too deep into this since we got an event, but here's a good question. Should I pull money out of retirement for a down payment on a house?
I always say no.
No. Next question.
Next question.
Hold on, wait. And that's no if it's your first home. So what do you think the answer is if it's to do real estate investing or fixing and flipping? No.
That's a great second bullet. That's a great second bullet.
Retirement money is for retirement.
Seriously.
Focus on that, right? Don't. It's just a game that you don't want to play. I've seen way too many people get burned. Yes, it has worked out for some people, but trust me, the numbers are not on your side.
But you get taxed heavily for that anyway.
Absolutely.
Pulling out the 401k.
Well, some people say I'm just doing a loan, and then I'm going to pay interest back to myself. Well, that's if you can flip the property for more than what it cost you to get it, to be able to sell, to get it ready to sell. So.
And you can't eat that house. Right? You run out of money, you can't go outside and eat a piece of the porch. I mean, I guess you could, but that's not ideal.
It can get messy. And then the other one I just wanted to bring up was just when you think about this idea of pulling money out of a 401k to buy a house, really what people are asking, what they're trying to deal with is making a down payment. It's what they're trying to answer to. And that can be one of the biggest barriers in our community to get into a house because a lot of real estate agents will tell you that the payment that you're making on a rental property can be very similar to a house once you own the house in terms of the mortgage payment. But there's a lot of factors that go into that. But then the question is, well, what if I can't make the full down payment amount and so I can only put in so much? If I end up with like a mortgage insurance payment I have to make in order to certify that, it's going to be covered, is that a bad thing? Like, is that the end of the world? I think that's a case by case. I don't know if y'all have anything you would say on that.
It is a case by case, but paying PMI is not the end of the world. And really, what you have to calculate and figure out is, okay, how long am I going to have this PMI? Because it's going to go away at a certain point. And then what's the alternative to saving up that same amount of money? How long will it take me to actually get there to have enough down payment to avoid the PMI? The other side of that decision, when it comes to the calculation and figuring out should you do it or not, is looking at it from the standpoint of flexibility, right? There's a lot of people who actually can put down 20% and don't. Because they're saying, okay, yeah, I could put this $50,000 in this house, but I think I'd rather put in 30 and keep the other 20 for flexibility. Because remember, once it's in that house, it's going to be very hard to get it back out. So it's not cut and dry, and it's not the end of the world. The main thing is does the payment work in with your long-term goals, right? Because you are paying an extra $100 for PMI, it doesn't really matter. And there are some places, because I did it personally, and it was my wife and I decided we didn't want to put the full 20 down. We actually bought it out up front. So there's some places where you can either pay up front and buy out the PMI, or they'll maybe give you a little bit higher interest rate. So we took the higher interest rate knowing that we weren't going to stay there long term, and it worked out in our favor, right? We didn't have PMI and we still end up making money on the property. So the most important thing when you're home buying is talking to a lender who's really going to get to know where you are financially. There's programs, especially for first-time home buyers. Some are income related, some aren't, and there's a lot of resources out there.
What about like double principal? Like people keep saying like in the Black community, oh, you pay double principal, or you pay more principal and you pay it down way faster or something like that.
So I won't say I'm not a huge fan. It depends, right? You know that's the underlying answer to everything is it depends. Don't negate saving in other places just to try to hurry up and pay off a house that you may not even keep. If you have excess money, meaning all the stuff that we talked about is being funded, then that's when you make the decision and say, okay, should I pay more? But if you don't have the emergency fund, if you don't have life insurance, if you're not properly funding your retirement, why are we trying to hurry up and pay off this house?
Good stuff. Good stuff. I already talked about this stuff that I touched on in terms of renting. Biggest thing I say besides a real estate agent is make sure you double check and read your lease. Especially if you lease in the suburbs or condos or particularly privately owned houses, you can find that a lot of those lease agreements will have clauses where you're responsible for a certain amount of repairs in terms of the cash value of the repair. If it's under 100, you got to make the repair and pay out of your pocket, or under 500 or something like that. So make sure you're reading these documents that you're signing and things that you're doing as you move about in your financial life. All right.
Sorry, I wanted to wait until the end, but you said something important here. So we all have debt, student loan, some mortgages. How should we prioritize the money that we have towards savings or towards debt? Like, how do we navigate that find that balance? Because a lot of times people say, oh, if you hurry up and pay off your student loans, then you will set. But then you can hurry up, throw all that money into student loans for 5 to 10 years, but then after that you're broke. You have no money to grow to do anything, right? So what's the right balance?
Again, it depends, right? I think I should get a t-shirt. It depends. Well, you have to find that balance. You are right. I think it has to be a combination of both, right? And not either or, right? You deal with your debt, but you also have to understand this thing called time value of money, right? So if it takes you 10 years to pay off, let's say your student loans or whatever, that's also 10 years that you negated saving and investing, right? So it's not just a straight line 10,000. It's what could that money have been also over that 10-year period or whatever it is. So I think that's where the importance of working with a professional to help you figure it out, but you should do both. I'm not a huge fan of people getting so focused on one thing that they negate other stuff.
Does the interest rate matter when you're like student loans?
Yeah, it matters somewhat. It matters somewhat. But again, it's having options, right? And how much is that worth to you to have options? Because maybe you are saving along the way, maybe you're investing, and maybe you just determine at one point, I'm done. I'll just take this lump sum that I have, throw it at it, and be done. I have somebody very close to me that was right there. Look, and I'm not mad at the person that ended up going to grad school, and I just wanted to choke him. And I'm like, yeah, that's great. No, I'm like, dude, we were done. I had you on this track, and we were done. But, that's all right. If I can touch on this, I know we're over time, but I want to make this point. The key is about understanding and getting educated. Anybody ever heard the phrase, investing is gambling? It's like gambling?
Yes.
All right, so if you went in a casino, what game do you think gives you the greatest chances of winning? Roulette, slots, blackjack. Blackjack. Blackjack has about a 50% chance of you winning, right? I'm not telling you to go to the casino when we get done, all right? Historically, if we look at the Dow Jones, which is 30 large companies, you see it on TV every day, the Dow's up, the Dow's down. Historically, if you go back to the inception, 1 year returns on the Dow Jones have been positive 74% of the time. If you go 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, you're in the 90s. That's not gambling. That's discipline. But you have to know that going in that, hey, there's going to be some downs. But you stick with it.
So, quickly, I know you're going to talk about this in a couple of months, but you just said that the Dow is historically 74%. It goes up, returns. Did you make the same claim about real estate then? And it's not a gamble? Historically, it usually goes up. I know 2008 has been a kind of slump for Detroit where it really went down. What's the historical, or is real estate a gamble, or is it not?
I'll let Tylene handle that.
It depends, right? Because when you're talking about real estate, are you talking about buying a home that you're going to live in?
Right.
Are we talking about commercial properties? Are we talking about fix and flips? So when you're talking about the risks that are associated with real estate, depending on what your purpose or what you're purchasing is going to depend on, how much risk you're taking on and how likely you are to get a return on your investment. Like a house that you live in, chances are if you're planning to live there for 30 years, the market may go up or down, but you're going to be okay at the end of the day and have an asset and probably some equity there. But if you're talking about purchasing a rental property or some fix and flips, there's a lot of risk that could happen that you may not get whatever your initial investment was. So there's a lot more variables with the markets. Typically in order for you to be able to purchase a stock or for them to put something on the exchange, there's certain requirements that are associated with it. When you're looking at purchasing real estate, depending on what you're purchasing it for, the regulations as far as there's no guarantee for you to get your money out, basically. So I wouldn't say that. I would definitely say that buying real estate could be a gamble, but it just depends. Your primary residence, not so much, but fix and flips and things like that, I would definitely say that's a gamble.
And keep in mind, right, the stock market is a leading indicator. Real estate is going to follow it, right? If the market gets into a heavy downturn, eventually real estate is coming right behind it. So it's typically going to follow, right? There's always ways to make profits in down markets, right? Whether it's real estate or stock, because if it wasn't, neither could exist, right? If everybody's losing money at the exact same time, it couldn't exist. So there's always value out there, but as Tylene said, the important thing is understanding what you're in and understanding the risk associated. Because everything has risk. I mean, look at the weather coming out here, right? Literally, somebody almost hit us on the way out here.
Also, the stock market has risk too, right? Because,
Yeah.
you're talking about investing in Dow Jones or Nasdaq or S&P 500, but if you invest in an individual stock, the smaller that company is, the higher risk it is of small businesses go out of business all the time. But obviously, if you invest in something that's the biggest company in the world or something, or at an Amazon, it's not going to go out of business tomorrow.
It should, but the key is to diversify. But I think you said something that I don't know if everybody caught. When you are buying stocks, mutual funds who are buying stock, you are buying companies, right? Think of it that way. You are literally buying companies. And these are companies that you believe in, right? Anybody watch Shark Tank?
Mm-hmm.
One of my favorite shows. You're doing the same thing as an investor. You're evaluating that company. Do I believe it's in its mission? Have they made money? Can they make money?
We're talking about HSAs a lot. I don't know.
say in retirement and you have less income. I know they talked about like using it for a little stuff here and there, but I know I heard that.
I think like a dollar is a dollar. Like if you did you get tax free dollar, that's a tax free dollar. It doesn't matter if you get $1,000 tax free or a dollar tax free. So basically, like if you're saving money with the dollars you spend right now, it doesn't matter if you do it now or later. Right?
But I think I understand your question. I guess if you think about it, I think the max for a single person is like $3,700 that you can put in HSA, and then for a married couple, normally it's twice, right? So that is a common strategy. Now, if you have something catastrophic, well, you're not gonna pull money out of a bank account that's sitting in the HSA saying, "I'm holding on to this to retirement," right?
Right.
But to your
but I
point,
think like the small stuff add up.
Right.
Like glasses, $200 here, $100.
depends on what you're putting in there, right?
Yeah.
Because
Can add up.
you don't know what the future is going to hold. But for older clients, that is a very common strategy to help offset long-term care expenses that may come. So no, that's a good idea, but if you have an expense, I don't think a couple $100 will throw you off long term. I'm getting my cough syrup. I have 4 kids. I'm not paying for it because I put it in that account. My wife telling me to get organic cough syrup, so I'm like, that's honey. But,
just on one random note, when you talked about the HSA, what reminded me is that my employer currently, or when you double click on these benefits, there's a lot of stuff hidden in them sometimes. And one of the things I found out is that they switched. I think their pharmacy benefit manager became CVS, and CVS sent everybody this special extra care card, which allows you to get even more discount on CVS branded stuff than if you just walked in the store and used your regular CVS card. And then there was some provision that lets you get free generic stuff, like you get aspirin for free or something crazy like that. So I'm going right back to that. Like, there's a lot of stuff these companies give, and they be like, "Oh yeah, you're getting all this," and then they, they're like, "Well, I hope you know that it's there." So yeah. Anyway, I'm done. Anything else?
I do have one other question. I have heard that it's better to save for something specifically. Like, if I'm saving, if I need new clothes, I'm going to save that for that specifically. Or if I need a new car, to save versus to have like a lump sum that just in your savings. Would you say yes to that?
It depends on the person, right? But that works for me. So of course I want to have like my savings that I'm just consistently putting something aside as your emergency fund builds, and then still just having like that cushion there for things that might come up, like we might need tires or whatever, down payment on a new car. But one of the things that I'm always encouraging my clients, especially the ones who like to either travel a lot or sometimes like really expensive things, is that they have a budget for that. And I'm like, if you look at how much you make annually, right? What do you want to allocate towards clothing? What do you want to allocate towards travel? Because it gives you 2 things. One, you get a little bit more of a planning approach as opposed to just, a trip comes up and now I'm just going to go spend however much. I can get the better rates by planning in advance. But 2, it helps you exercise that discipline. So you're not just like, popping up buying a, $2,000 bag. There's nothing wrong. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. But if you have different competing priorities, you want to make sure that you have, a budget in place. It doesn't mean that, okay, I have to have a budget for shoes, budget for clothes. You know what I'm saying? But you do want to have, that is helpful for most people.
You got to know you.
Yeah.
Right.
You have to know who you are.
Have a budget for lunch.
But shoot,
Budget for
Excel is
black
my
owned
friend.
businesses.
if only there were HSA plans for buying clothes. Just redirect some tax-free money into this account, and then I can swipe this card at Macy's, and then we don't know. The government don't know. Anyway, I'm sorry. Any other question?
If there's no other, I'd just like to make one final point, if that's okay. I know we're way over. So, by the show of hands, who in here has a barber or a beautician? A doctor? Dentist? Who has a financial advisor? And I see one hand kind of sideways. And
Right.
what does that mean? Is that yes or no?
I'm researching to get
I saw one kind of pointing to the side. Does that mean that person's fired? And here's why I asked that, right? So I'm a research person in this field a lot. There are studies out there by Vanguard, and write this down. Vanguard, Russell Investments, Voya, the value of an advisor. Right? We talk about stock market returns. They estimate that the value of working with a financial advisor equates to about 4% a year. 4%. Statistically speaking, only about 1 in 3 people across all categories have a financial advisor. When it comes to black households, it's 1 in 10. So when we talk about working on this wealth gap, you cannot and should not do it alone. It is vital to get somebody who's going to work with you so that when the 60-year-olds are coming in my office, literally, and talking to Tylene and I in our office, I wish I would have done this years ago. You know what our grandmothers used to say, if I had $1 for every time I heard somebody say, I wish I would have done that. And that 4%, the largest percentage is not investment advice. It's behavioral advice. Right? There's a reason why we have a study called behavioral finance. Because we know we should save money. But guess what? 70% of people, according to research, live paycheck to paycheck. And Darvell said it earlier. Income does not equal wealth. We often think, okay, I just need to make more money. Listen, obviously we can't talk about the stuff that we see every day, nor should we, but there's a lot of people who don't have an income problem. They have an outgoing problem.
Yeah.
So that's kind of my spiel to say, listen, we are here to help. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate.
You said Vanguard, Russell Investments, and what's your another one?
I think it was Voya. And it's just, you can just Google value of an advisor, and all of them have the same underlying thing to work with somebody.
You had a question?
Yeah, I got here late, so I don't know if you guys already did it, but is there any way you guys can put your contact information up so that we can?
I will be sending it out, so if you register, you will get all their information, as well as in the event page, there's links to their bios,
Okay.
and you can see information through there. Tylene, you have any closing remarks?
Not really. I think the most important thing is talk about money, because you guys are here right now, but so many people don't have those conversations. And not only just as it pertains to accumulating wealth and preparing for retirement, but also making sure that assets stay in the family. A lot of times people don't do their estate planning, and things go into probate, and it's very difficult to pass those properties on without proper planning. And when you think about our salaries and things like that, a lot of times people don't talk about that stuff, but it can help us to make sure that we're getting, equitable treatment in the workplace as well. Because those numbers that were up there, they're real. Like that wage gap between men and women is huge, but also between, the majority and many of us minorities is large. So we have to take advantage of every opportunity that we have to ensure that we're, commanding what we deserve and being good shepherds of what we receive.
You got anything? Good. All right. Sincerely, I thank each and every one of you for coming out this evening. I know the snow and the Michigan roads have not been kind, so greatly appreciate and also deeply apologize for running over, but hopefully you took away a few nuggets that were valuable to your time here today. Like I said, I will be sending out information on both of our excellent subject matter experts who were able to download some data into your brain. And again, Black Young Professionals of Metro Detroit really appreciate you and look for more events coming in the future.